talk about Occam's razor. This is something that kind of gets applied, this concept. Now, he was around prior to Bacon, but this concept is borrowed from him, William of Occam. All right, and there are multiple spellings for Occam. I'm not too worried about that. I don't have you spell stuff anyway on your exams, but you know, I have been challenged over how it's spelled. This is how I learned when I was in college how it was spelled, and so it stuck with me. And then I realized that there are multiple spellings for Occam. It does not really matter. All right. Okay, entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity. What's he saying?
Don't overpopulate.
Don't overdo it. Don't, you know, once you get the point, let's call it good, move on to something else, right? Entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity. The idea that gets applied to the scientific realm is that, you know, once you've got enough data to verify that this phenomenon you know, it keeps happening over and over again, you call it a day, you move on, all right? And of course, the calculus thing that we talked about a little while ago, you know, helps to offset some of that repetitive going over. I mean, if people didn't finally, at some point, accept that when you do this, that happens, then the experimentation itself would never end, right? It would never end. They would just keep doing the same experiment. Well, let's just see if this happens again. Well, let's just see if this happens again. And 10 years later, well, let's just see if this happens again. All right, no, we wouldn't get anywhere, all right? We wouldn't get anywhere. We wouldn't move on to new things. So this is kind of the concept that gets applied with Occam's razor. All right. Yeah, let's talk about Popper just a second. Okay, he believed that a hypothesis, proposition, or theory is scientific only if it is falsifiable. Now, what does that term mean? Come on, it's in your notes.
This is false because I can show you it is by an observation experiment.
Okay.
Is that good?
If it can be proven false by observation or experiment, right? If it can be proven false, then that is something that's falsifiable. All right. I think I'm quoting that roughly verbatim there. The point is, falsifiability is that if it can be proven false, then he's saying that only those things which can be proven false are scientific. And for him, metaphysics is nonsense. We have a whole chapter 3 on metaphysics. For him, it's nonsense. Can't even talk about some of those things. Now, I'm not talking about the physical universe, but talking about anything that might be non-physical. You know, religious matters. Again, spiritual things, or anything beyond what we know as, you know, physical properties of the universe as such. Anything else is nonsense, and you can't even talk about that because you can't prove that to be false. You know, it's how are you going to prove it false? How are you going to disprove God, for example? Well, you can have all kinds of rational arguments, but you can't disprove because perhaps God exists in a realm in which you have no knowledge. You see, so that opens the door for the possibility of something existing somewhere that you don't know anything about. All right, a God, a whatever, Martians on, you know, Mars or beyond, you know, whatever. There's a realm in which you may have no knowledge, so you can't talk about that. But he says, well, that's not science then. Let's don't talk about that. It's a bunch of nonsense because it's kind of, can't disprove it. You know, maybe you can't prove it and he can't disprove it. So we're going to stay with what we can disprove, what we can prove false. All right. He thought that the main question in philosophy of science was to distinguish science from non-science. And Popper thought that metaphysics, of course, was just futile to even to discuss it. So he would have just thrown chapter 3 out. Okay. Wasn't worth his time. All right. which leads us into next topic. I'll let you write it. I see somebody still writing. Everybody got that in notes? Okay. The topic of evolution versus intelligent design. We talked about intelligent design with the philosophy of religion. Well, we talked about the arguments for the existence of a God and the teleological or the argument from design, things like that. But this is kind of tacked on into, because this is a big debate among creationists versus evolutionists to some degree. And there's various composites thereof. There are those that weld the two together and take religious texts such as the book of Genesis from the Bible, and they will try to make the two fit together. But opponents of intelligent design claim that it does not meet the criteria of science and should not be treated with the same seriousness that evolution is. Okay, defenders of intelligent design either defend the view as meeting the criteria of science or challenge the coherence of this distinction. All right, that's kind of in a nutshell on that. And, basically, I'm going to take this back to Francis Bacon. The reason I told you I want you to get a good hold on Francis Bacon because I want you to consider something. And let's look at it from a purely, by Francis Bacon's definition, a purely scientific perspective. I'm talking about Francis Bacon's definition. Identifying those forms, mustering the instances, and using that knowledge to gain power. That's his foundational idea of science. And of course, even with Newton's calculus addition there, you still have that kind of mathematical calculations going on there. But when you're talking about things like evolution and creation and things of that matter, here's one of the problems that you run in using Bacon's philosophy. If you're going to start talking about science regarding creation, evolution, these things that there are theories out there about, how can you, by Bacon's definition, call anything that you're discussing about the past, that far back in the past, science? Can you use Bacon's definition of science and really come up with a firm, solid fact or truth about what happened millions of years ago? Is that possible? And why not?
Because there's no evidence of anything that far back.
Right. There's no human recording of data. Nobody was there to record and say, this is exactly how this happened. So by Bacon's definitions, and by Bacon's philosophy, which, typically we think of science in terms of empirical data, empirical evidence, hands-on, human observance. You're always going to have to refer to evolution, things like this, as theory because it does not equate to the facts, as it were, by that definition. Because there was no human hands, no human eyes observing, recording that data, passing it on to anyone. So it will always remain theory. I find it ironic, however, though, even though it's referred to as science, that even 20 years ago, plus, when I was in high school, that it was taught as fact. It was taught as fact. And I find that interesting because that's really an unfair treatment of what happened, how things happened. It still remains a lot of question marks as to exactly how these things transpired.
And teachers get fired for teaching otherwise.
Well, I'm sure in some instances they could. And I don't know what the public schools are doing as far as if they even in the textbooks even mention the creation ideas or philosophies, theories, religious beliefs, or anything like that. But it's something that gets treated as a fact, when in fact, by the definition that we've seen that science, has historically operated on, it doesn't equate to fact because there wasn't that human data that was passed on. Okay?